All right, so this lecture will continue the lecture about infant nutrition. And so this is day 2 of this lecture. So first, I have a fun fact for you. I don't know if you can see this, but can you all see this? Is your screen big enough? Here's what this is. This is a note or a little form that was given to my husband's mother after she had him. Okay, so she would be about 100 now. I forget when this was. It's been quite a while. Okay, so she died a few years ago. So my husband's name is not Boy, it's actually Greg, but Greg Fleury, who's born 1951. Weight, percent, whatever, age, 5 days. So they did the measurements here. What I thought was interesting was what they told her to feed him. Okay, so boil water 10 minutes, measure 12 ounces boiled water into a sterile jar, add 3 tablespoons of dextromaltose, that's a sugar, right? 6 ounces of pet milk, that's that concentrated milk like Carnation milk or pet milk, those are brand names. Pour 3 ounces of this formula into 6 bottles. Cover and sterilize them, and then feed when the baby's hungry. And then give sterile water 1 or 2 ounces twice daily between feedings. Okay, we've talked a little bit. We haven't really talked about what's in infant formula yet, but we've talked about breastfeeding. Just right off the top of your head, does this seem like it's going to be good enough?
Didn't you say that water wasn't necessary because there's already water in milk?
That's right. So the water's a bad idea. But look at absolutely. And what about the formula? How do you think this compares to breast milk, for example?
Well, it seems like a lot of carbohydrate. It specifically says, carbohydrates, not as much fat, as far as like what they're adding to the formula.
Yeah, and then okay, so we're going to look at infant formula in a minute, but remember breast milk, we talked about essential fatty acids and all the immune components and the things that affect the immune system. And there's so many things we talked about with breastfeeding. And today's formula is a lot more sophisticated than this was. This is almost enough to kill you. I mean, quite frankly, they diluted it enough so it's not just cow milk, but it's not missing. There's so many things that have happened, and he's 69 years old. There's so many things that happened in the past 69 years that we've learned about infant formula. There's a whole generation of people that were fed like this. Now, since I'm throwing him under the bus, I will say that he's one of the smartest people I know. So I wonder what he could have been like if he'd been fed some nutrients when he was little. He's a IBM executive. He's retired now. He's writing books about computers for fun. He has a robot running around the house for fun. That's his entertainment. So it worked, but my goodness. So let's see what's in formula now. So there's 2 things here. Purchase options and types. So formula, okay, first of all, standard infant formula content is required by law. So people can't add more of there's a few things they can change, like essential fatty acids and some probiotics and things like that. There's some things that they can add and advertise with, but the formula has to be adequate. It has to be nutritionally adequate, protein, carbohydrate, fat, vitamins and minerals. It's by law. So you can go in and buy the cheapest formula and the nutrients will be there. Not what's in breast milk, but the nutrients will be there. So you can buy it in 3 different ways. One is liquid, where it's concentrated and it comes in cans and you mix it 1 to 1. And then powder, a scoop of formula, 2 scoops of water. This is, or per directions. You always like to look at the box, but this is typically how it's made. And ready to feed. So this is when it's already in a bottle, it's already diluted. And so all you have to do is pop the top off and feed it to them and then throw it away. So, I mentioned the environment because I care deeply about these things, but if you think about all of this and how we got here to provide formula for people across the nation, across the world, how much we could change in terms of climate change and also supporting health if we could cut back on this. It's one of the worst things we do in terms of looking for resources, is growing the cattle takes a lot of water. They produce a lot of manure. We've got to do with that. We've got the bones of cows that have to be disposed of. We've got the foods that we prepare for the cows and so forth. So, and then the trucking of everything all over the country. So it's just interesting, but this is what it comes in. And having said this, I'm going to get off of my high horse about infant formula, because for people who cannot breastfeed or choose not to breastfeed, this is going to work in the United States. It's safe in the United States. It's not as safe as breastfeeding, but it's close. Okay, so we can call it nutritionally adequate. Oh wait, the types, we're going to talk about formula made from, it's not cow milk by itself, but cow milk is the base of that formula. And then soy, some formulas are made with soy, some are made with protein hydrolysates, which is a breakdown of proteins. Typically they take cow milk and break it down into essential amino acids. And then there's some premature formula that's formulated a little different, because the needs of a premature baby are different than those of a mature baby. Okay, so let's take a breath here. Cow milk formula should be the first choice. So if you're not taking notes, put stars by this or something, because this is always a test question. You know, which of the following should be the first choice for a family that's going to be formula feeding their baby? Okay, with no other health conditions. Now, what they do, this table here compares or tells you what's in cow milk formula. The next slide, I'm going to kind of show you how it's made. So this is kind of like a recipe, if you think about it that way. So the calories are designed to mimic human milk. Human milk is 20 calories per ounce. And I mentioned this last time too, that what we know about infant nutrition is based on what an infant would get, an infant that is breastfed would get, the average intake. So this is basically the average intake, 20 calories per ounce. And so that's how they make formula. Protein, they take skim milk, because we don't want to use full fat milk because you got to change the fat up. So they'll take skim milk, maybe powdered skim milk, maybe liquid skim milk, and then add some more whey protein. So you may end up with a little more protein than human milk because of this. But they're trying to get at that casein to whey ratio to make it more like human milk. So that's one thing. Another is changing the fats. All right, what is the quality of fat in cow milk formula? I mean, sorry, in cow milk.
And then saturated fat.
Yeah, it's pretty high in saturated fat, right? You know that. So, you know, so that's that problem. So you don't really want to use cow milk fat here, because we are concerned about saturated fat for humans. So instead, the fats are added as a vegetable oil plus these guys. Do y'all know what these are? What's this? Arachidonic acid. What is it?
Is it omega-3s and 6s?
It's an omega-6 fatty acid. It's the long chain omega-6 fatty acid. It's in cell membranes. You get it from eating meat, for example. What's DHA or docosahexaenoic acid? And you should practice saying words instead of just reading them. It's better when you give a talk if you can say the word. So docosahexaenoic acid, where's that found?
Fish.
Yeah. What type of fatty acid is this?
Omega-3.
Excellent. It's an omega-3 fatty acid. These are both in the essential fatty acid groups for humans. These are the long chain ones, and I'll explain later why we have to do this. So I'll explain now, but I'll get to it later with pregnancy. We're not good at converting the short chain fatty acids like flaxseed oil into arachidonic acid. Humans aren't very efficient at it. So during pregnancy, mom wasn't making that much. And so while they're consuming food, if mom was breastfeeding, they would get these in her breast milk if her diet was good. So we need to add them to formula. Up until the year 2000, these were not added in the United States. Japan and Germany were way ahead of us, but we didn't add long-chain essential fatty acids to infant formula until the year 2000. So it's interesting. Okay, carbohydrate, well, you know it's gonna be lactose because it's cow milk, right? You'd have trouble getting it out of there. Now they can make lactose-free versions by adding, removing some of the lactose or breaking it down so it's not a disaccharide. And then they can add corn syrup for sweetness. There's ways to get the lactose out of there. It works okay for infants who have lactose intolerance, but not for those who have galactosemia. Have we talked about galactosemia yet? Does that word look familiar to anybody? You can just say yes, but I don't know what it is. Nobody?
Yes, it was in our textbook.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Galactosemia is a metabolic condition in which individuals cannot process galactose, period. So an infant born with this genetic condition, galactosemia, can't consume lactose. The ramifications are very serious and include cognitive impairment, permanent cognitive impairment. So cow milk would work for kids with lactose intolerance because most of the lactose is gone, but not with galactosemia. They'd have to use another kind of formula.
Dr. Chriselle, I have a question. So with regards to galactosemia, is that something that a child might outgrow as they get older with different gene expression? Okay.
No, this is a metabolic, you get you have to have a gene from mom and from dad. Okay, so it's a recessive trait. But if you have both genes, you're never going to be able to process galactose. Never going to happen. So complete dairy-free life. Okay. And then they're okay. So thank goodness we have screening. That's why you take a kid in 3 days after they're born and do some tests on them to see what's going on. Okay, so vitamins and minerals are added to mimic human milk. But there's some exceptions in that they add a whole lot extra iron to formula because the bioavailability is low, so they add more. And then some additives, there's emulsifiers and some ingredients, and I refuse to go into all the detail because there's a lot of components in here that have been added over the years to try to mimic human milk, but you don't need to know every single thing that's in here. You just need to know what we've talked about and that there's several other additives that are there. So here's what the process of making cow milk formula looks like. And this is generic. I created this out of watching some videos on how to make formula. I didn't find one that was good enough to show you for manufacturing. I do have a video up on how to mix formula. So that's helpful for you to just have an idea about how to mix it. But this is how the companies make it. So they mix ingredients together and add skim milk, and they have this big giant stainless steel tank. Some of the ingredients, right? So this big tank. Then they add fats, oils, and emulsifiers. And emulsifiers, you're going to add these here and probably later on too. But you have to do that, otherwise all the fat will float to the top, right? So to keep the fat dispersed, you need emulsifiers. And then vitamins, minerals, and gums are added. In gums like thickeners like carrageenan and xanthan gum, things like that create the viscosity. And they're added whenever whenever it's the right temperature, right? Because you can't add vitamin C and then boil it because you're going to break it all down. So they add it when it's appropriate to be preserved in the formula. Then it's pasteurized, and they run it through a stainless steel pipe at a certain temperature. So you can see it gets up to about 200 degrees for about 30 seconds, and that's enough to kill everything. Okay, yeah. And then homogenized. So that's when you probably remember this from food science, but basically a simplistic way of thinking of homogenization is when you force the fluid through something with a lot of holes in it, and it helps break the pieces into smaller parts, right? So it's emulsified and everything's like blended in. So that's why milk is like cow milk is the same at the bottom it is at the top because it's been homogenized. Same thing with infant formula. And then package, and it depends on how you're going to do it. If you're gonna dry it out and put it in a powder, or if you're going to do 1-in-1 or whatever. So anyway, that's just to give you an overview so you have in your head how infant formula is manufactured. Okay, soy formula, this one's interesting. Protein is isolated soy protein and plus methionine. Why do we have methionine? What is methionine?
An amino acid.
Yep, it's an essential amino acid. Do you remember anything about soy? Do we grow well in soy? Do you remember learning about that in intro? Okay, let me address this. This is why I asked, I wasn't sure. So you've learned about complete proteins and incomplete proteins, right? And you've learned that in order to grow properly, you need all the essential amino acids. And you don't have to all come from the same food, they can come from different foods, right? And so you can eat a vegetarian diet and have enough essential amino acids as long as you vary it up. Soy is complete enough for adults. If this is your primary source of protein, it works well enough for adults. There is not enough methionine in soy protein to provide adequate growth. Do you remember the term limiting amino acid? Have y'all heard that before? So you didn't know when you were a freshman that somebody's going to come back and ask you these questions later. Okay, so methionine in soy is a limiting amino acid. It's not present in adequate amounts to provide for growth of infants. Okay, I'm gonna say it again. It is an essential amino acid. It's also a limiting amino acid because it is not present in soy in adequate amounts to support the growth of children. Okay, so that's it about the protein. And what about the lipids? Looks familiar, right? Same thing we do for cow milk formula. And carbohydrate, is this going to have lactose? I sort of have the answer right here on the slide. It's stupid, but no, okay. It's not from cow milk. It doesn't have lactose. So corn syrup, glucose, or sugar. And I find this interesting because we need carbs. You know, carbs have a bad reputation, but everybody needs carbs. You know that, right? And so we need it for energy. But what bothers me about, in particular, corn syrup or sugar is that they're sweet. Glucose really isn't that sweet. Not everybody can taste it. So they need a source of carbohydrate. But man, if you drink a sweet beverage for the first 6 months of your life before you try anything, I wonder if that has an effect on, do you like broccoli later? Some studies show that kids that are breastfed do better with new foods because they get the flavors in the milk. And with infant formula, it tastes the same every day. However, kids grow on it. And then the minerals, they have to add extra iron and zinc. And I don't know if you remember this about soy, but soy has a phytates in it. And what that means is they bind minerals in the gut and they make the minerals less bioavailable. So if soy was your primary source of protein, you need to make sure you're getting good sources of iron and zinc because you don't absorb them as well. So they had extra amounts in formula to get around this problem. Okay, so the caution is interesting. First, do y'all remember what phytoestrogens are? Have you heard the term? Just say yes or no.
Yes.
I got a yes. I bet there's some no's too, but thank you. So phytoestrogens are estrogen-like compounds found in soy. You may have learned more about them in food science. I won't go into the details about them, but they're weak-acting estrogens. And there's always been an interest, you know, in does consumption of these estrogens affect health? You know, and they've looked at breast cancer and growth and all kinds of things. And there's just not real strong indicators that it's a problem for infants fed soy milk. Like they don't look at them at age 20 and go, wow, you're sterile or you have issues, you know, any kind of outcomes they've looked for haven't been different. So I don't know that we know enough about phytoestrogens, but there's still that concern. You know, so when you're thinking about what kind of formula do we want to offer, you might want to think, well, maybe not soy, because there's still this niggling doubt about phytoestrogens. I don't want to say anything stronger than that because then the literature doesn't support it. But the second bullet is important and should be important. They're both important, but this we know more about. Premature infants who consume soy formula don't grow as well, and they experience reduced bone mineralization. Okay, so this doesn't work for premature infants. So that's a perfect test question, right? Which of the following formulas is not appropriate for premature infants because it interferes with growth? So if formula-fed infants can't tolerate cow milk formula, then the next best choice is hydrolyzed formula, not soy. So we don't want soy to be our go-to. I wouldn't overstate it with people, because if they've already used soy protein, I wouldn't go, well, you're in trouble now, because I don't feel that way if they didn't use it for a premature infant. But if people are asking you for recommendations, it's cow milk first. All right, and the last issue here is who should use soy formula? All right, and 3 groups. We've already talked about galactosemia. You remember now, galactosemia is
an intolerance to galactose.
Yeah, it's the actual, it's a genetic condition where people cannot metabolize galactose. So it's absolute intolerance. And remember, consuming galactose would cause brain damage. So soy looks pretty good for that. All right, the parent is a strict vegan. That's a personal choice. And then the last one is lactose intolerance. It might be easier if the child does have lactose intolerance and they're consuming formula. This one may be an easier one for them. When parents have little kids, you know, they cry and they can't really communicate, and the crying can just be really stressful. And so people hop around on formulas sometimes trying to figure out, well, maybe it's the food. Sometimes it's not the food. Sometimes it's just the developmental stage of the kid, but they're a puzzle and you're trying to figure them out, and it takes a while to do that. Okay, so this is another perfect type of test question, you know, about who should use soy formula. All right,
I have a question.
Yeah.
So in terms of the galactosemia, how would a parent figure out if their kid has that before feeding them like a cow's milk based formula?
They're not going to find out right away. So after 3 days and then after 2 weeks, you go back to do well baby checks, and they check for phenylketonuria, and I presume they look for metabolites of galactose or not metabolized. And so you can't tell until they eat. So you got to let them eat something, because it's not going to show up till then. Okay, so you feed them for a little bit, and then they do the blood test, and then they can tell. So, but they do it quickly. I mean, it's 3 days or, you know, a week or two is going to be okay. A lifetime of exposure is not. It's a very good question. Okay, hydrolyzed and amino acid, these sometimes are the same type things. What they do is they take the protein and heat it up so much and treat it with enzymes so that you basically have a breakdown of the protein into amino acids instead of being whole proteins. Sorry, I'm offended here. Would you please put a closed parentheses right here on this? I left one out and it's hurting my sense of balance. So fix that. So lipids, I don't know if you've heard this term before. Have y'all heard of MCTs, or medium chain triglycerides, anywhere?
There's like a popular smoothie edition, which is an MCT oil.
Yeah, that's pretty much right. So, you know, in diet, most of our diet is either long chain or short chain fatty acids. You remember that, like from dairy, you got your short chain fatty acids, and from vegetable oils, they're long chain fatty acids. So you learned in physiology how we digest these things, right? And so long chain fatty acids, you know, we take fats and we process them in the small intestine, and then we package them up. Do y'all remember the term lipoproteins? We package them up and send them out in the blood. And so, but we have to be able to process the long chain fatty acids, bring them in and bring them across the cell membrane and so forth. Well, medium chain triglycerides are easier to deal with. So some infants, this may be easier on the digestive tract. And in terms of, are they fun or useful as sports supplements? I don't think so. Right. So I've never been convinced, except for infants, that they're that big of a deal, but it's been a while since I taught sports nutrition, so I'd have to look up the current stuff. All right, carbohydrate, not lactose, right? That's good. Recommended for infants that don't do well with cow milk formula. So this is really, if they just have an intolerance to it, then this is your go-to. Not soy. right? Soy would be your last resort. Now, notice it doesn't taste good. Not palatable means it doesn't taste good. So that's interesting because we talked about, cow milk formula being kind of sweet. Well, this is going to be sweet too, but it's just the amino acids don't taste that good. If you've ever had a vitamin, and vitamins aren't even a good example, but you ever taken a pill like that where you taste it and you're like, wow, that's weird. That's what amino acids taste like. If you just mix them up, they just are bitter, right? Some of them have a bitter taste. But what's interesting about this is that they like their own formula. So they'll thrive on this, they'll drink it. They won't go, wow, I know there's something better out there, because they don't know what's better out there. So they'll drink it. And then it affects what they like. So they tend to, infants that are fed these kind of bitter formulas may end up liking bitter produce more when they get older. So it's an interesting concept. So anyway, that's hydrolyzed amino acid formula. And then the last one I wanted to talk about is premature.
Question, just to clarify, so hydrolyzed amino acid formula, that's still made out of animal protein, or is it vegan?
Great question. It's going to say, and there may be some variety to this, but most of them, I believe, start with cow milk.
Gotcha.
But you have to, and I don't know really if you've got a soy alternative, and no one's ever asked me that. So let me see if I remember to look that up. Look up hydrolyzed from soy. Thank you. The idea is we shouldn't care because we break it all up into amino acids, but if you're vegan, you would care, right? So the source would matter. Okay, so premature formula. One thing is it's got more calories than human milk. That's because premature infants need to catch up with growth. Now we have to be careful because sometimes the formula is fine, but in feeding a premature infant, sometimes we want them to catch up too fast, and if they gain weight too fast, that can increase their risk of becoming overweight later on. So they need enough calories. But early on, you give them this higher calorie concoction so that they do better. And oftentimes breastfed infants are getting a combination of, that are premature, giving breast milk and some of this high protein or high calorie formula to help fortify them. And that's a better situation for them. That's a medical decision. But okay, so it's got more nutrients in it. It still uses a medium chain triglycerides, and the carbohydrates are a mixture of lactose and glucose polymers. It doesn't taste good either. But same routine, doesn't taste that good, but it works. Okay, now
I got a question.
Yeah.
So has there ever been, it's kind of off topic, but for the two formulas that, were like bitter tasting, and you said that children end up liking bitter tasting like foods and stuff. Do you know if there's ever been a study like linked to childhood obesity and what formulas they were on? Because it seems like they maybe wouldn't like, sweets and stuff as much as a child.
Yeah, it's interesting because I haven't looked, the literature I usually look at is breastfeeding versus formula feeding, but I haven't really looked at types of formula. That's a good question. Formula and weight. I'll see if I can dig something up.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, that's a fun question.
I have one question that's kind of off topic too.
Okay.
How do you feel about a mother being vegan and like all around and being healthy for the baby? Because I've learned that like plant foods are very not bioavailable.
Mm-hmm.
So is that true like around all plants?
Okay, so it's actually not off topic, but after we talk about this a little bit more about kids, we're going to go into pregnancy and then prior to pregnancy, and I'll address this more carefully. But that's also a very good question, and how I feel about it is that a vegan diet is not complete. And the way I feel, the reason I support that is because we do need long chain essential fatty acids. And it's tough to get long chain essential fatty acids, omega-3 fatty acids, from a vegan diet. The only way you can do it is there's a type of algae that's been grown that produces DHA. And so if you take that DHA and use that as a fortifier, that's one way to get at that. But you'd have to eat a lot of it. And so there's that. And then also, there's going to be, depending on their diet, but your calcium, vitamin D may be a problem, depending on what you're leaving out, right? Protein can be okay, but like you mentioned, iron and zinc levels may not be high enough. So typically what people do is take a prenatal vitamin, and it's a vitamin mineral supplement. That pretty much works because it fills in those gaps. But I don't think, I think the most healthful diet there is a primarily vegetarian diet with small amounts of animal protein to help with the bioavailability of protein, and also to provide some bioavailable iron and so forth. So my personal diet's pescatarian because it's got omega-3s and also heme iron in it. And I was a vegetarian for many, many years because I think I talked about this at the beginning because of the animal rights issues. I have trouble with how we do that. I still do, but in terms of pregnancy, it's not ideal. And they need to know more. And that's part of what we're going to learn when we get to the pregnancy lecture is how do you help pregnant women who want to be vegans. Okay, so that's in our wheelhouse about what we need to be able to do.
Because I think that's super important. And then I also, for like my own, like just for my own health, like I've had a lot of broken bones, and like I drank milk when I was a kid, but I don't necessarily drink milk now. And I basically substitute with almond milk because you said it's fortified and that is good. But is the amount enough in terms of making up for the bioavailability?
Okay, so here's the deal. It's a really good question. Here's the deal. We have no DRI for milk. None of us ever drink dairy again, and we don't have to have it. It's a convenient food, especially for adolescents to have them drink milk, kids to have them drink milk because they're getting their calcium and vitamin D. You have to have a pretty good diet to get around that. But so your diet would be affected by milk, but if you don't want to consume milk, then you need to be sure you have really good sources of calcium and vitamin D, and sometimes you need a vitamin D supplement because it's hard to get at that, right? So
because my milk is fortified. It does say that it has vitamin D and calcium.
No. But if you're almond milk,
yes,
yeah, but it's still not the same, and that's a supplement versus a whole food source. I go to broccoli, bok choy, and kale for my calcium, and almonds and stuff like that. So it's those real foods. The more real foods you eat, you can look at food sources of nutrients and go that way. Then that's a way to build strength too. But it may be that you get your vitamin D levels tested, see if they're low. Assuming you have time, money, a primary care physician, can go somewhere. But anyways, it's a good question. We'll bring it up again. Okay, so this one's interesting. I believe this is my last slide in this lecture. This is something to keep in mind. Powdered infant formula is not sterile. The liquid forms are. If it's a concentrate or one-on-one, those are sterile because they're vacuum sealed, just like canned goods. But the powder isn't sterile. And so it can have a form of salmonella and a chronobacter. And these can make kids sick. They can get dysentery from it. Okay, so little babies less than the age 2 months should never have powdered infant formula. They should start out on that ready to mix stuff, or ready-made or liquid. And they don't use them in the NICU. NICU is NICU is a neonatal intensive care unit. If you don't know that, write that down. Neonatal intensive care unit. So they don't use powdered formula for those babies. Okay. You don't feed it to premature infants. And then you don't want to prepare a lot so that it has time to sit around and let the bacteria grow. Okay, so what you want to do is prepare a small amount at a time with the older kids. You're not giving it to younger kids, but if you decide to do it, it's cheaper. So a lot of people, this is what they have to do. So prepare a small portion, refrigerate it, and if you warm it up, then use it in an hour or throw it away. And we haven't talked about this yet, but you never want to give a baby a bottle and then save half of it and then put it in the fridge or something, get it out a couple hours later and start over, because even breast milk's safer, but any kind of formula is a perfect medium to grow bacteria. So breast milk actually has components in it that are protective, but You just don't want to do that. So once their mouth has been on something, you call it contaminated and it's done. So I just wanted you guys to have this basic information about powdered infant formula. Okay, any more